In this video, I'll give a beginner's guide to using Logstash version 9. Most things in version 9 are the same as version 8. Some configuration parameters have changed, but other than that, I haven't noticed anything else that's too substantial. I am still in the early stages of using Logstash version 9, so if I notice anything else that's extraordinary, I'll publish some new videos on the matter. The other thing is, I've used Logstash a lot in many of my earlier videos, but I never put together a comprehensive guide to cover the fundamentals. So that's why I decided to make this video. After watching this video, I do have a few follow-up videos. I have a video on how to use Elasticsearch for centralized Logstash pipeline management. And for the paid members on my channel, I have two other videos. I have a video demonstrating Logstash architectural patterns, and I also have a video showing how to secure the communication between Logstash and the Beat library. If you still want more Logstash videos after watching these, many of my older tutorials are still relevant. I'll suggest a few more in the description of this video. So with all that said, let's get started. I've got all the steps that we need to follow documented on this web page over here. This web page is actually a summary of this documentation from the Elasticsearch Logstash website. Now, the Logstash documentation is pretty extensive and it covers a lot of advanced topics as well. So my goal with this documentation is to summarize just the fundamentals, enough for you to get started. The other thing I'll mention is that with the official documentation, I've currently selected version 9 of the documentation, but I've noticed that throughout the documentation, there are still parts that reference version 8 and version 7. So my goal with my documentation is to have everything up to date with version 9. So hopefully that will help everyone. Now, in terms of getting started, I have a virtual machine out in the cloud somewhere. It's got 8 gigabytes of memory and it has Ubuntu version 24.04 installed on it. The public IP address for it is this one over here, 172.105.27.189. The first thing I'm going to do is do an update on the machine itself so that it has the latest distribution updates and updates the repository definitions. And in terms of tools I'm going to use, I like Vim as my text editor. We're going to download stuff with curl. We'll need to unzip things. I'm going to use the JQ library because what JQ does is it can help format JSON data into a more human readable way. Since in our demonstration, we're going to output a lot of things in JSON format, the JQ library can help with that. And then NewPG and GBG, just because they're common things that might be needed when we install Logstash and other Elastic tools. So let me just copy this and get this thing going. And if there's any prompts that come up, I'll just accept the defaults during this installation or update process. Looks like everything is up to date. So now we'll go ahead and install Logstash. So to install Logstash, we're going to get the keyring information, update the repository definitions, download another package, and then install Logstash. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to paste it to a script over here first. And then run it like this. So I'll pause until this is done. Okay, it looks like Logstash is installed now. In fact, you can confirm it by going to this directory over here. Yep, looks like it's all here. And the command line tools for Logstash can be found over here. Okay. So we're ready to move on. To run Logstash, you need to run this command over here. And there are two different ways to use this command line tool. The first way is to run this command through the user that you've logged into the server with. And the second way is to run this command through a systemd service. I'm going to demonstrate both ways, but I'll start with running this command through the user that I'm already logged in with. Before I do this, I should mention a note about the difference between version 9 and earlier versions of Logstash. In version 9, if I try to run this command as a root user, I get these warnings and errors saying I'm not allowed to run it as a root user. In earlier versions of Logstash, I didn't get these warnings or errors. So I'm guessing that these warnings and errors is a new security feature of Logstash version 9. Now, because we can't run this command as a root user in Logstash version 9, I'm going to create a new user, and this new user won't have sudo privileges, and we'll have this user run this Logstash command. So let's start by creating that new user. Add user em, and I'll give it the password abcd1234, abcd1234. Let's just hit yes. All right, and let's go to that actual user itself. And let's go to home directory so that we'll start doing our work from here. So we're pretty much ready to run this logstash command. To run this command, we need to give it some information and some parameters. The first information you need to give this logstash command is your configuration pipeline, which is this argument over here. Let me pull up the documentation. Okay, so this page explains what the Logstash configuration pipeline is made up of. It's made up of a few parts. The two mandatory parts are the inputs and the outputs. So the input part specifies what your data source is that you intend to ingest. So this is mandatory. And the output is also mandatory, and it specifies where you want to ship the data to. This middle part is the filters block, and the filter is optional. You can use it to transform the data from the input, transform it, modify it before it gets to the output. So you can do things like remove sensitive data, you can do some arithmetic with the data, you can reshape it. So it's the transform process in the ETL process. Now, to specify a configuration pipeline, it looks something like this. So you can see that this input here reflects this input block, and this output here refers to this output block here. In this configuration pipeline, we do not have the filters block, which was optional. In terms of what the input data source is, it's stating that we're going to use the standard input, which means whatever you type into your keyboard. And for the output, we're going to use standard out, which in our case is just printing to the computer monitor. These parts here are what we call plugins. So this input has one plugin called the standard in plugin, and this output block has one plugin called the standard out plugin. And you can have many more plugins in each of these blocks. You can get the full list of plugins from the documentation on the website. So I've got it opened up here. If you go input plugins, you can see that we're using standard in. You can see that this is one of the plugins that are available for input, along with all these other input plugins. So you can have HTTP input, you can have Java generators, you can have CSVs. We're going to demonstrate CSVs a little bit later on. Or actually not CSV, we're going to input files, and we'll use the CSV filter plugin to transform the file's content into JSON afterwards. Okay, so these are all the input plugins that you can select from, and we'll demonstrate some of them in this video. And likewise, for the output, standard out, if you go to this page here, you get a list of all the output plugins that you can choose from. We're using standard out, so that would be this one over here. And a little bit later in this video, we're going to output to Elasticsearch as well. So that would be this one here. So we'll demonstrate all that shortly. And the other thing I should say is you can have multiple output plugins. So you can have standard out here, and you can put Elasticsearch, you can put file, output, you can chain them not chain, but you can put several in here. So you're not restricted to just one output. You can have several parallel output streams. We'll demonstrate that a little bit later in the video. The other argument you need to give it is the path settings and sometimes the path data. So path settings is if you have additional configuration and settings that you want Logstash to read, you specify where that can be found or which directory will hold that settings file. The default, or actually maybe not the default, but the more universal place where those setting files are stored is in this directory here. So this is a settings file, and these are some other details to help Logstash run. When we run the systemd service, it will actually read from this directory as the settings directory. The path.data can sometimes store markers or cache content or other information that keeps track of the state of your Logstash service. So that's what this command will do. So let's run this as the EM user that we've just created. So let me go back to this user, and this user is not a privileged user. And we go ahead and just run this. Sometimes it could take a minute or so for the Java machine to start up to run Logstash. And it looks like things are actually working now. And because we've chosen standard in as the input and standard out as the output, this means whatever we type into our keyboard will immediately get output to the monitor. So I will just type hello world and I'll press enter. And there we go. Now we've got a successful demonstration of Logstash, and we know that Logstash is working. And I can press Control C to stop the Logstash service. So what we can try to do next is let's try consuming a CSV file, and then let's try to output that to Elasticsearch. And one thing I forgot to do before this video was install Elasticsearch onto this actual server. So we're going to do that right now. I'm going to follow the documentation from our previous video for installing Elasticsearch version 9. So I'm just going to fast forward through this. If you really need the details of how to install Elasticsearch in Kibana, then you can just watch our earlier video, which I'll link to in the description of this video. So I'm just going to press fast forward on this one. I've got Elasticsearch up and running now. I didn't bother installing Kibana since we can do everything through command line anyway. So coming back to here, Logstash is going to need a copy of the certificate for our certificate authority. So let's go ahead and run these two commands. All right, and now we can go back to the EM user. And what I'm going to do is let's make a CSV file. I'll call it customers.csv. And this will just have some fake data that I've made. And now let's make our configuration pipeline. So I'm going to copy this and call this customers.conf and paste it in here. So let's talk about how this works. So as you can see again, we have our input block, and the data source is going to be this file plugin, and we're going to read the customer's CSV file. We'll start from the beginning of the file. And in terms of sense DB path, I actually forgot what that is. Let me look it up. Okay, now I remember. So the sense.db path keeps track of where you last read from the customers.csv file. So if there were more lines and such, it'll remember where to start from again. But by setting it to dev null, every time we restart the service, the Logstash service, it'll just read from the beginning again. So that's what this sense DB path is. And then over here is an example of the filter block. So what you're seeing here is we're going to do two different plugins. The first plugin is the CSV plugin to say that this is actually not just a regular file, it's a CSV file. And it has these columns, which we've already specified in our CSV file. And for the actual, for the zip column, we're going to treat it as an integer. So this is using the mutate plugin. And finally, we go to the output block, and all we're doing is just, we're going to have two outputs. The first is sending things to Elasticsearch using the Elasticsearch plugin. And we're going to specify the host through environment variable. We're going to turn on SSL, and we're going to read the, we're going to verify the SSL with this certificate from the CA. We're going to use the Elastic user, and then we're going to use the Logstash key store to load in the password during runtime. The key store will help keep our password more confidential, because then it won't be readily visible through this configuration file. We're going to store all this data in an index called customers, which Elasticsearch will automatically create. And every document will use this email as the document ID. The other thing we're going to do is we'll also just print things out straight to the computer screen. So the data that we get from the input here is streamed in parallel to both Elasticsearch and to our computer terminal. So let's X out of here, or let's save it. Oh. Save, and move on to the next step. So we will use an environment variable for this. We're going to need to put a password in here during runtime, and we're going to use the key store for that. So the key store, you can set one up with this command here. And in a moment, it takes a while for the Java machine to start up, so we'll give it a few seconds. Okay, there we go. Yes. Now that we've got a key store started, we go ahead and create this variable ESPass. Well, let me just copy and paste. And the password is ABCD1234. All right, so now we can go ahead and start Logstash, and we can do that with this command. We're going to create the environment variable ESHost, and we'll give it the IP address of our machine, which I'm going to have to change. We're going to run this configuration file. Our path.settings is the home directory of our EM user, and any additional data that Logstash needs to create to run this command, we'll also store it in the home directory of the EM user. So let me copy this, and I'll create a script here called run.sh, and we are going to update this IP address to our server's IP address. Paste. And let's go ahead and run this. All right, you can see that the CSV file got printed to the standard out, which was one of the plugins we put in our output block. And if I press Control-C, I should be able to curl the server or the Elasticsearch server and see the same result in the customers index. So let's go ahead and run this command. But I'm going to have to update the IP address over here to the IP address of our machine. I'm going to paste it in like this. And there you go. You can see that the JQ command also helped us format it so that the data is more human readable instead of everything on one line. So the next thing we're going to do is try to run several pipelines at the same time. And we can do that with something called the pipelines.yaml file, where you can specify multiple configuration pipelines and have Logstash run them all at once. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to create another configuration pipeline. This time I'll call it tasks.conf. So let's create tasks.conf, paste in here. And you can see it's a very similar format to the customers.configuration file. We're going to read a CSV file called tasks.csv, which I'll create in a moment. And it's got 2 columns. And then we're going to send this to Elasticsearch, but we'll put it in a different index called the tasks index. And I'll also print things to standard out. And we're going to create the tasks.csv file. And let's add one more entry to the customers.csv file, just so that our configuration pipeline, or just so that Logstash has more information to read from the customers file. And I will press enter, paste. And now we're going to create this pipelines.yaml file, which states that there are 2 configuration files that Logstash should be reading from. Oops, let me copy, paste, there we go. And one thing I should note is that in terms of the location of this pipelines.yaml file, it has to be in the directory specified by the path.settings. And we've been saying the path.settings is this home EM directory. So you have to make sure that this pipelines.yaml then is in this EM directory. So we'll go ahead and run both. So I'm going to actually just take my other command, run pipelines, plural, S to let myself know that there's more than one pipeline here. Run pipelines. And what we need to do here is we no longer need to explicitly specify the configuration file. The path.settings, or this logstash command, is going to first look for the pipelines.yaml file in the path.settings. It's only overwritten, or the pipelines.yaml file is overwritten once you put in the -f flag. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, I can see the output of the tasks.csv, and I can see a new customer here, as well as the other older customers, I think. Yep. All right, so we know the standard out is working, and now let's go ahead and curl the database, or the Elasticsearch database. Here, let me just clear this for a moment. And let me find my older command. So this one, if I look in the customers index, I see this new user here, Faisal and Carol. Okay, so 3 records in customers database, or the customers index. And if I look in the tasks index, I should have 2. So drinking water, and I have the eat pizza over here. And that's 2 tasks. So that's an example of using the pipelines.yaml file. Before we move on to the final experiment, I want to make one more note about all these configuration files and pipelines that we've made. Right now, all these pipeline configurations are defined as files on our Logstash server. It doesn't actually have to be this way. You can actually have all these pipeline configurations managed by Elasticsearch, and then have all your different Logstash instances read from Elasticsearch for all the pipeline configuration details. This can make management of pipeline configuration files a lot easier. I have a video that shows how to do all this called the Logstash Centralized Pipelines Management. So you can watch that video if you want more details. I'll link to that video in the description of this video. So let's go ahead and move on to the final experiment, which is this one here. We're going to run Logstash as a systemd service. And we're basically going to repeat all the experiments above, but just do it through systemd. We're going to need to do this as a privileged user. So I'm going to go back to the root user over here. And I have this bash script here that basically does everything we've been doing in the previous experiment. So let's copy this and I'll call it setup.sh. I'll paste everything in here. So what it'll do is it'll create this directory called cert in the varlib logstash directory. And we're going to copy over the Elasticsearch certificate for the certificate authority into this directory. And then I'm going to create a directory called data inside the varlib logstash directory. And we'll make a new customer CSV file here. Next, we'll create our configuration pipeline, which is the same as our earlier experiment, except I just place it in this logstash conf.d directory. And I should actually show you this directory. So let's go over there for a moment. So this is the default location that Logstash settings are stored. They're definitely going to be used by the systemd service. And inside the conf.d directory is normally where you put in all your configuration pipelines. Right now it's empty because we don't have anything defined. But you also notice that there's a pipelines.yaml file here already. And what this will do is it'll read all the configuration files in here and load them into your service. Now there is something very, at least it wasn't apparent to me the first time I was using Logstash. It's that this star command here, or this star asterisk, even though it loads all these configuration files as one big concatenated configuration file. So if you have 3 different configuration files in here, then this statement is saying take those 3 different configuration files and make it one big configuration file. That's actually different from what we've been doing, which is this. We have 2 different pipelines running as separate threads, so to speak. This is actually what we want, so that customer data is sent to just the customer index, task information is sent to just the task index, whereas a statement like this is going to send both the customer and task information to both the index, the task index, and the customer's index. So that's what happens when you mash everything together with this wildcard here. And that's how it's different from this configuration pipeline where we keep it as 2 separate pipelines. Okay, so I mentioned this because if we go back to our script here, we're saying we're going to create this configuration file, but further down later, we're going to keep it as a separate pipeline from the tasks pipeline. Okay, and we're going to and once we've done that, we're basically overwriting the pipelines.yaml file that I showed you just a few seconds ago. Okay, so that is the configuration file for the customers, and this is the configuration file for the tasks. And I mentioned the pipelines.yaml already, and let's make sure both these directories are readable by Logstash. So let's go ahead and run this. And just like that, if I go to varlib logstash, there should be CSV files and our CAs there. If I look in conf.d directory, our configuration files are here. And if I look at the pipelines.yaml, it's been overwritten and we're keeping it as 2 separate pipelines. Okay, so let's see what's next. We're going to need to define the ES-host variable because it's used in our configuration files. And if I look for this logstash.service, let's actually copy this, find this file. Okay, so it's in here. If I open this up, copy, So when I open up this file, you see that it runs the logstash command and the path.settings is in the logstash directory. But in terms of environment variables, it's only going to use whatever is defined in these files. And neither of these files actually define this ESHost variable, which is a custom variable that we defined. We need systemd to be able to know this. So if I actually, let's say, open up this etc default, default logstash, oops, let's do this again, logstash. Notice that there's no ESHost in here. These are the environment variables that this service will use, but ESHost is not defined in here. And if I open up the etc sys config logstash, there's no mention of it at all in here. So we need to add our ESHost variable to this systemd module. But I'm not going to edit this file directly. Instead, I'm going to create an override by running this command. And what I'll do is paste in just this override. Okay, so I paste it in here, update the IP address to our Elasticsearch instance, paste like that, and this will be added to the original module. So save. Okay, let's see what else we need to do. We also need to create a key store for our ESPass. The key store that we made for the EM user, it's sitting in the home EM directory, but for the systemd service to run, we're reading from the etc logstash directory. So we need a new key store in here. Let's go ahead and create that. And once that has started up, I go ahead and add the ESPass variable to the key store. Yes. And let's run this. A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and I think we go ahead and enable Logstash and run it. Systemctl enable Logstash, systemctl daemon reload, systemctl start Logstash. We can check the status of Logstash as it goes. So it's starting up the Java machine, so this could take a moment. Okay, it looks like we have some information already. So let's do a curl to the Elasticsearch index. So let's take a look at the customers directory or the customers index. And I'm going to update the IP address to the one that we have for Elasticsearch. Okay, we can see some new customers in here already. And we can also take a look at the tasks index. And you can see that our new tasks are in here. If we had used the other pipelines configuration file or the other pipelines.yaml file with the asterisk.conf, then we would have seen customer information in this task index as well. And in the customers index, we would have seen tasks information as well. But by keeping our two pipelines separate with our pipelines YAML file like this, then we keep the information separate. So that concludes this beginner's guide. I recommend watching the next video on how to use Elasticsearch to centralize management of Logstash pipelines. And for the members, check out the advanced topics like Logstash architectural patterns and securing communication between Logstash and Beats. Thank you and see you in the next video.